I guess well, we will hop right into it. As you guys can see, we have a very special guest. So I would like for you guys to welcome, hopefully warm welcomes, welcome Fiorella Isabel of the Convo Couch and part of the MCSC network. Fee, how are you doing tonight?
Hi, pretty good, pretty good. In spite of all the craziness going on.
Oh, I
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah.
Chris, brother, how are we doing tonight?
Oh, man, just hanging in there, man. Can't complain. Excited for the show. I had a long week, putting a lot of hours as usual, but there's a lot of things to talk about and break down. Looking forward to hearing Fiorella on the main topic, as it gets annoying, so I kind of tune out from time to time. So it's good we have people like her who like actually pay attention to this shit because I'm kind of over it.
Yeah.
I understand, but it's honestly just warming up, in my opinion. All right, so let's go on ahead and throw the intro
You're right.
on our new intro.
Here because you have a question that you need an answer to.
Hello, and thank you for joining me. This is the political matrix.
Bookmarks because these words did not come from us.
Mostly kidding. Mostly.
And the garlic aioli.
And then they're going to change the narrative to Black Lives Matter to all Black Lives Matter, and then they're going to talk about LGBT.
So I felt like I wanted to put a couple of clips together.
Seltzer all day long. I love that shit.
Doesn't matter where we are. We obviously came up in the
And you know how he treats them. He don't treat them nice at all. He real rough with them, and you was a good man.
Budget and so much more are forming this weird cabal.
Yeah, it's not. None of them are.
Do the Chinese own part of that?
So he picked Masvidal. So I have Kobe tonight. Whether it's Biden, whether it's Obama, just sitting up there.
There are people in the Green Party that can organize. No, they can organize. They usually just get blackballed by their own party too.
Taking orders from the private industry here.
Like I say, people come on here, they can say stuff they don't normally say on their own shows, which is fine.
Unmute. Hello, everybody. Glad to see. I see a couple more of our friends out there. Variant, Steve, Popeye Sailor. But we're gonna hop right into it. We're lucky enough to have Fee, but we don't have her as long as we'd like. So we're gonna get straight into this stuff. There is so much stuff going on, especially with this Russia-Ukraine stuff. We will talk about a little bit of Pfizer stuff a little bit later. We'll talk about some Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, but first off, I wanted to talk to Fiorella. I've noticed a lot of the Convo Couch's coverage has been excellent. Last week, of course, you guys saw we had Pasta on here, and so I'm happy to welcome Fiorella on here. I watched her live stream last night. Excellent talking to what was it? Rachel Blevins, Cynthia McKinney, Dr. Cynthia McKinney. Sorry, and was it Soraya? It was my first time. Running across her. Yes. And so thank you for, exposing me to her. But Fee, can you give us like your breakdown and understanding on all this stuff that's going on, especially right now?
Well, it's a lot. But I mean, what's going on is another psyop in the big picture sense of this. We went from Trump derangement syndrome to then Trump supporters derangement syndrome to then the pandemic and fear mongering about that. Whatever you may think of it, the point is that it was weaponized to divide. And then, of course, it was the unvaccinated as being the evil villains of the story, to now you must hate Putin and Russians, and you must also obey the Ukrainian flag waving call for democracy by an empire that has nearly 900 military bases all over the world and constantly overthrows regimes and does whatever it wants with the rest of the world. So, but still put that aside, because Putin is trying to insert this Sudetenland that Hitler once did, is the narrative. And, Never mind, what happened in 2014. So
Yeah.
that's like the big picture sense of what is going on. The reality is that this began a long time ago. Ukraine has had a neo-Nazi problem for decades. In fact, some of the fascist entities actually came out of the region. But you could go back, I guess, to simplify it to 2014 with a Maidan coup, where the US-backed neo-Nazis armed them, many of them, of course, from the C-14 and the Azov Battalion. And this was in the Donbas region, particularly Donetsk and Luhansk, where these people have been wanting their own sovereign independence for a very long time. And they have been asking Russia to recognize their independence. Once that coup began, there was attacks on ethnic Russians, on Slavs, and other minorities like the Romani. And there was neo-Nazis that began destroying everything, from their camps to the culture of Russia, where they were burning books and also giving citations for people speaking Russia. Simultaneously, of course, there was the guy that comes in later on as Zelensky, who was funded by this gentleman that also funded the Azov Battalion. But of course, we can't forget about Victoria Nuland, who, along with Jeffrey Pyatt, decided to remove democratically elected leader Yanukovych, who wasn't even anything of a revolutionary of any kind. But they removed him, and then, of course, inserted their own puppet, who then pretty much since then Ukraine stopped being essentially like a democratic state, one could argue, because it was no longer under the control of sovereign Ukraine. It was under the control of NATO and the West, who wanted to use Ukraine to expand their control of Eurasia, because there is this idea that who has control of Eurasia is going to have control of the world. And that's exactly what the United States wants to accomplish. And of course, the same players are coming back. Victoria Nuland just got done admitting that there are
Oh yeah, hold that feet. Before we get into that, I wanted us to go back up a little bit on what you said about Zelensky and like his whole rise to power. After the coup in 2014, a lot of people don't really understand that whole narrative of the billionaire who helped prop him up through his comedy career. And a lot of people like I was listening to your live stream from the other day, and it was talking about how a lot of people don't know Zelensky himself is a billionaire. I mean, this isn't just some like random, comedian who kind of had it hard and he just gained all this popularity all of a sudden. And then, this storybook, kind of ending, oh, he's the president now. And, it's a lot more going on. So can you explain to us a little bit more about the billionaire who's funding him and that whole network and how he's tied to the Azov Battalion?
Right. So Zelensky was a comedian, and he got like a comedy show on TV where initially they spoke Russian, and it was geared towards the population. And I don't know if you guys saw the video that we just did, but we literally went over how this guy, he's this billionaire named Kolomoisky, and he had the TV show that starred Zelensky called Servant of the People. And that TV show was extremely popular. And in that TV show, Zelensky basically made jokes about how Ukraine was going to join NATO, and how Barack Obama was their one real president, and how they that you could only move up and gain money by working with band-right fascists. And if you look at the video, people are laughing.
Chris, can you grab that video? Oh, sorry to interrupt you, but can you grab that video?
There are some people that weren't, obviously, because they saw like.
Where'd you put it, Marcus?
It should be. Well, that's right. I didn't send it to you, but it should be on my Twitter when I retweeted Fiorella. But if you can't find it, don't worry about it.
I'll get it.
He also talked about having like how you like basically that like Banderite, like uniting with Banderite fascists was a good thing to make a career. He talked about how NATO. He talked about the Jews and how they had Bandera's Kolomoski. Like he talked about all of this as if it was like a joke, but he of course isn't a teacher that became president, because that was the story. The story was that he was a working guy that became president. Well, the reality is he was an oligarch. And a lot of people, when they talk about Russians being oligarchs, they don't focus on the fact that there are oligarchs in Ukraine too. And there are obviously oligarchs in America, but it was just painted as like this fantasy. And moreover, his whole campaign, when he went through with the campaign, which was a party that was funded by by Kolomoisky, was also called Servant of the People, which is insane. He ran under that party and he won, but his whole campaign was virtual, with YouTube videos, social media. And the reason a lot of people say he won is because he was just recognized by the public, and they painted him as an outsider, somebody that was different than the typical politician. Where have we heard that before? We've heard it in Donald Trump. We've heard it in Barack Obama. You could even point to the Squad as being, particularly AOC or Sandy, as being like the next sort of generation of that. But this gentleman, Kolomoisky, was also funding the Azov battalion simultaneously. And this was known. So when people say that there's no such thing as real neo-Nazism going on in Ukraine because Zelensky is Jewish, they completely ignore the fact that Zelensky doesn't have control. First of all, he's a puppet. He's an actor, literally. And he was placed there for a reason, because he was complacent. Also, of course, the fact that their focus of the Azov battalion and of these fascist entities, these Banderite fascists that take their cues from Bandera, is really cleansing Russians. Like they don't like the Russians in particular. So it doesn't matter. And there, of course, you could go back to World War II of many cases where there were Jewish people of ethnic descent that were working with Nazis. I mean, this is nothing new. And now we have the Israeli army going in there and defending, working with these neo-Nazis. So there's no such thing as like, oh, just because you're Jewish, it means that you're not with these.
A lot of people don't understand about Stefan Bandera, and they don't understand like that connection and that history there. They also understand World War II and some of the collaboration. There's a reason why people were called collaborators. That was ethnically Jewish people who were working with Nazis. Yes. I mean, not saying that every single person is or not, but we're just saying that there were people who were collaborators. It's the same thing which, if you look in any kind of conflict, you look back to the Aztecs, the Incas, the Mayans, they always had somebody who was selling them out from the inside. I mean, almost to be careful with this term, but the slave who was inside the house, who always told of any rebellions or runaways or any of that stuff. You have people who do that. And so you can't just go, oh, well, he's Jewish, so there's no possible way he can be helping. Well, what about the Azov battalion, where he literally went to the Donbass region and tried to confront them, and they told him basically to go pound sand. Right. They're like, dude, get out of here. We might even, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that they actually threatened to kill him, so,
that's why he won't rebel against them, because he doesn't have the power. Yeah.
I was going to say that narrative is for the people who don't think, who just like really just accept things as they see the headlines. They don't look any deeper. So it's, oh, he's Jewish, so he can't be affiliated with any Nazis. Every Jewish person hates Nazis, right? So you don't think about it. So when somebody says it, it's like, oh man, they're just conspiracy theorists and the rest of the other bullshit that they say. But with that being said, as Marcus alluded to, if you go back and look at World War II, there's a lot of collaboration between the people who call themselves whatever. You get banned these days. You don't know what the you don't know what the guidelines are for getting banned these days. So you gotta be real careful in what you say. But yeah, go ahead, guys.
Yeah, Steve had something, and I want you to respond to this. And shout out to Steve from Slow News Day. Says Western Ukrainians are predominantly Germanic Eastern Ukrainians are predominantly Russian and Russian Jew. Odessa used to be called the Gateway of Zion. For those who don't know what Zion is a reference to the ancient city and home in Israel. So that's what that means. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, 100%. The country has been divided for a very long time based on those ethnic divisions. And what would have been intelligent was to have like two different countries, I guess, a long time ago, in my opinion. A lot of people have been asking, why is Russia acting now? And I think there's some sort of element to they were waiting and seeing how bad this would get. Also, if NATO would continue to expand eastward, which of course they did, duh. And of course, also China's
Well,
you know,
I want you to kind of expand that on that a little bit. A lot of people think that, well, no, I mean, okay, they've kind of alluded to playing footsie with Ukraine, but can you name off like some of those other countries? Because I can think of at least about 6 other countries which were considered buffer states between between Russia and the West that now are part of NATO.
well, like, are you talking about like Poland? Like what other countries
Well,
are you referring
like Poland, like
because
what is
Poland's
it?
the biggest one, I think.
Poland's the biggest one.
Because Belarus is leaning on Russia right now.
Yeah,
For sure.
well,
And there's not, yeah.
Poland is one which kind of fell in, which was a buffer state. I'm drawing a blank on myself.
Did Poland donate some ships, jets?
Planes is what they're I guess what they're trying to work out. The deal is that Poland is going to send planes, MiG-28s, to America, and America is going to send those to Ukraine. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I know so far. And I think Belarus is sending help to Russia from what I read.
Yeah, I don't know why they would need the extra jets though. I mean, that Ghost of Kiev is like killing every single Russian plane. He's shooting every single Russian plane out of the sky. So I mean, what do you need more
According
jets
to
for when you got the Ghost?
Yeah, according to Western media, that's happening, right? Yeah, it's crazy. What but I wanted to touch on something else you mentioned before I lost my train of thought. You mentioned something about before we were talking about the states. You asked me a question. What was your question? I'm trying to
Oh, I mentioned like I said some of the other regions which were buffer states to the to the west. Some of those which because I'm drawing a blank. I'd have to pull it up right now on my phone.
I think it was
But
before that we were
What do
talking
you
about
have?
Japan.
You have Slovakia.
yes, that's one.
You'll have Hungary.
Okay, yeah. There we go. Yeah, Hungary.
Czech Republic too.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure exactly when they got in, but I know those were some of the states which were at a time buffering states, especially back to like 91, which they weren't in NATO. Yeah.
Uh-huh. But there was something else that you asked before that, and I was going to answer you, and then I said something I completely forgot.
I'm sorry, I got you distracted. Bad memory of mine. But I was along with that also. A lot of people are not factoring in just some of the things which Zelensky is pushed for. Like I've noticed that it's almost like it's almost like a guy who he's been kind of fooling around with a girl, or you can switch the narrative, you switch the scenario either way. But somebody who's been kind of just leading somebody on. Oh yeah, I'm gonna leave my wife. I promise I'm gonna leave my wife. And then when it comes down to it, and they like move out of their house and drop everything, and then they show up at their front door like, hey, are you gonna leave them? And they're like, well, you know. It's a little bit more complicated than that, and that's what it kind of looks like with Zelensky. Zelensky really, I'm not gonna say Zelensky believe, because I believe Zelensky's a puppet. I believe that oligarch which is behind him, and maybe groups of oligarchs behind him, all thought that, you know what, hey, the U.S. is ready, and the Western powers are all ready to actually go in, you know, full on Russia, and they're all kind of getting left at the altar in a sense. That it's not happening.
Yeah, like I think even Biden tweeted something out like, we're not going to start a war with Russia. But like the thing is, they're using Ukraine, right? They're weaponizing Ukraine for this proxy war with Russia. I've said it a million times. This isn't about Ukraine's independence. This isn't about the Ukrainian people. They don't give a crap about the Ukrainian people. Ukrainian people have been in dire economic straits for a long time. They've been paying ridiculous amounts for gas to stay warm. They've had food shortages. The country, that was part of it. The country was divided for a long time between these two groups, and the other element was that Donetsk and Luhansk, the people of there, asked for their independence to be recognized, and then Russia recognized that independence. Finally, they recognized it because initially they didn't want to. And this whole thing about how this just happened out of nowhere is false, because the vast majority of people in the Donbass region voted for the in 2014 for the more pro-Russian guy. Like it was not something that was. And they also voted for for Crimea to be part of Russia.
Isn't that the stuff which kind of led to the Minsk Accord?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, that was kind of like the happy medium that they tried to make, to say, okay, well, you guys aren't going to get your person who you want in power, but here's a middle ground. I mean, because I remember reading reports that plenty of people in the Donbass region were asking Putin to send in troops and invade because of what's been going on for the last 8 years, because the Azov Battalion has been just being like a band of thugs running around the country.
That was a criticism that he didn't go in sooner.
Yes.
Like he should have gone in sooner before. Yeah.
Well, I noticed something else that you guys broke that I hope you can probably shed a little bit of light on.
Sure.
It was a French Ukrainian who was on French media, and she started telling them that you guys are kind of a little bit off. The Ukrainians have been bombing Ukrainians. Yeah. And granted, we all know it's multiple factions within Ukraine, but to try to ignore that and act like all the Ukrainians are on one accord and it's Ukraine versus Russia, and everybody just stand with Ukraine, it's kind of, in my opinion, ignoring all the people who are sympathetic to Russia and who feel oppressed by the current Ukrainian government. I mean, also, you have a lot of people don't talk about when Zelensky went in and how he starts shutting down. What was it? Media that was contrary to him, or that opposed him in any way.
Yeah. So people keep saying like Russia has like censorship, mass censorship, and the thing is that lady was basically saying Zelensky is the one that was censoring people and that completely got rid of any opposition media. And that was also part of some of the things he was joking about during that comedy show as well. And so this is nothing new. Like I said before, Ukraine wasn't a democracy at that, like since 2014. They stopped being under like a democratic control, because if you think about it, it's like our elections here. It's like if you're gonna say you live in a democracy and then that for example, Bernie Sanders was completely, pushed out of the election in an unfair way. I'm trying to mince my words here because I don't want to get in trouble. But, and like, so, and then you look back at like the coup that was obviously funded by the West. And how can you say that after you have a democracy, when obviously you don't, because you don't have control of your own country? And so it's the same thing where that lady was saying, and obviously the pundits were like, oh my gosh, like they didn't know what to do with her, because everything she's saying is true, but you won't see in mainstream media. You have to go to Russian media, you have to go to Chinese media, you have to go to like places now that we can't even have access to because of the censorship. So like it's really crazy, because when you watch the other like non-Western media, which you should watch, because why would you want to have an only
Oh, I think feet froze there. Go on ahead.
I'm back. Am I back? Or
yeah, you're back.
Okay. So for example, they were saying that that the Russians were keeping people from escaping in Mariupol, and that wasn't true. There's actual video footage of them helping people get out of the city. It's actually the Azov fighters who literally shot people to keep them from going, who literally use civilians as human shields to try to make it look like, oh, these Russians are killing civilians. And when you see the footage of that, you see very real footage. When you see the footage of, look at what the Russians did and how they what at these people at the school of children, blah blah blah, you don't see the footage. You just see like certain pictures and certain people that have been found to be actors. This is very similar to what happened in Syria during the Syrian chemical attacks when they were staging this sort of thing. And if you've ever listened to or read Eva Bartlett or Vanessa Beeley's coverage on Syria, which they were the first people there and the first to get it right and don't get nearly enough credit as they should to for what they did, you can see how that was manufactured. Well, it's the same thing here. They're even manufacturing propaganda where they're like, well, if there was an attack by Russia and it were to happen, here is a video of the Eiffel Tower getting blown up. I mean, everything is to create this idea that the Russians are Hitler and that they're going to destroy Europe if NATO, the good guys, don't stop them. It's a very Captain America-esque type of fantasy that they're creating, and people are unfortunately buying into it.
Fiorella, I have a question for you. So we know most of the players, right?
Yeah.
How does this end? Does it end with Ukraine split? Does it end with occupation, like lifetime occupation of Ukraine by Russia or NATO forces? Where do you see this going?
So what's happening right now is actually hurting the West and us, obviously, as you guys can see, more than it is hurting Russia. I mean, it's going to hurt Russia. Sanctions always, attack the working class. The fact that they're getting rid of anything like anything that has connections to America. I mean, they got rid of certain Google owned entities there, McDonald's, all these things like are going to affect the country no matter what. But Russia has a market that people in America don't even count. Like they don't even think of the market. Like they have China in the east, they have the pipeline, they have, and with China of course comes the Belt and Road Initiative, which I mean I'm not going to talk in depth about that because there are two sides to that, right? There's good and bad. But they also have a market in the global south as well, and Africa. And this isn't like Russia will be fine in terms of that because they know that these countries need their gas and their oil. Now, I don't see NATO and the US getting out of this with a win because it's just not going to happen. It's not happening right now. In fact, most of the troops have been defeated. The ones that are left are the neo-Nazi factions. So how does this end? I mean, nobody really knows, but what I can say is it either ends with them accepting Putin's denazification ask and the attempt to keep a neutral Ukraine, or what you said, I think the country would be split. But I have a hard time thinking Russia will even allow that. And the reason they won't allow that is because they already see what's happening with the biolabs, right? They already see that there is the anti-ballistic missiles
It's
on their
fake news,
border.
Fiorella. There's no biolabs there. Fake news.
Yeah, right. And so they already see that this is there, and they don't want they don't want that expansion. They understand that they right now at this moment they're gonna stand their ground, and I think that's what this is. I honestly believe, and I'm not a fan of Putin, and I hate that I even have to say that but it's just like I can't tell you how many people think Russia is communist because it's not. I can't tell you how many people think like Putin is some sort of tanky. Putin is more on of a centrist, almost to the right in terms of how he's governed. But it's interesting how people equate you to say when I say something like, "Oh, Russia is trying to end this conflict," they're like, "Oh, so you love Putin." And it's like, no, like that's what's happening. That's just literally what's happening. They're putting their foot down and they're saying we're not going to allow this. Now, in terms of what is happening in the global agenda, in terms of that, it's going to be interesting to see, because like that's a whole other element to this whole conflict. And I don't see a way that the United States is going to come out winning as they're making it out to be, but they're trying. This is their Afghanistan. Again, this is another Afghanistan type of conflict, in my opinion, because you see like the how wasteful it is, and how it's being portrayed. And the same people that were, let's say, media that completely bought the whole weapons of mass distraction back then is the same media that's here, but now they have obviously technology on their side. They have social media platforms to continue censoring people, and what's happening now is propaganda like I've never seen before. It's even exceeded the propaganda from COVID, to be honest. Like
Yeah.
I didn't think it would, but when you see people on the quote unquote left cheerleading not neo-Nazis, or whitewashing the legacy of Hitler, and trying to say that Putin is Hitler, it's insane to me, the level of brainwashing and psyop. And this has not happened overnight. I mean, it's happened really fast in terms of Russia, but obviously there's been the preconditioning with every single event that's happened. And the question is, what's the next thing? Right. And
Mhm.
we can look to the conversation between Victoria Nuland and Marco Rubio as to, well, if there were to be a release of these bioweapons, then it's certainly Russia's fault, right? And she's like, yeah, of
Oh, it's
course.
all on Russia. It's only them.
Well, I mean, I find that interesting because it seems like basically since the pandemic, everything has been only one side. Actually, if I really think about it, you can take it back to the election. Either you're a Biden supporter or you're a Trump supporter, and you had to be put in one category or the other. After that went on, then is you're either a Republican or a right winger, and you're anti-vaxxer and all this stuff like that, or you're the Democrats and we're the party of science. And then it's Ukraine. Either you're for Ukraine or you're a Nazi Putin sympathizer. And it seems like everything is getting forced hard into these hard lines,
Yeah.
where you have to be one or the other. Like, I think a lot of and that was something you brought up interesting about the schools. They're showing a lot of images, and I actually, because I work with a normie Dim who's one of those who has a very, very hard opinion and pushes everything. Yes, exactly. Um, has a very hard opinion on everything and just doesn't want to listen to anything. Like I was telling him, I'm like, you do realize that there are neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and he's like, I don't even want to hear it. I don't want to hear nothing that you got to show me. And I'm like, I was going to show you NBC and CNN, the people you listen to saying it and admitting it, not just some kind of random independent, which you would think, oh, well, they don't know anything. I was going to show him actual mainstream sources which say this. This isn't just something we're pulling, out of the atmosphere and making up.
Right.
And then he finally started saying something which he was like, well, wait a minute. They're bombing schools. Well, why are they still in school? And I was like, there you go. Now you're starting to think just a tad bit. Why would you still be in school if they're running bombing raids over your town? That doesn't make any sense. They're saying, oh, well, they bombed this hospital. Well, is anybody in the hospital? Yeah. And then I told him, I said, being a former weapons guy, one thing I can tell you is munitions go off. Sometimes they don't hit the intended target. That's one thing that also can happen. So some of these attacks, and the media can frame it however they want to. And then another thing is sometimes intel is not entirely correct. Sometimes you're told this building is X, and when a plane is flying over at 10,000 feet, they can't necessarily look and see a hospital sign on the front of it. So, I mean, that's something that always has to be factored in. Chris, you were saying about the narrative about, I want people to think about it, because you brought this up, Fiorella, when you said about, about Eurasia and that side. I don't think a lot of people factor in, just because the West is so-called trying to stop Russia and cut off their funds in every different, well, not every different way. They're still letting the gas and natural gases go, because if they did do that, Russia could easily say, you know what, we're going to shut off natural gas and oil to all of Europe and just literally start freezing them out. And I don't think people realize, like, countries like Germany are like 70% dependent on Russian natural gas and oil. Italy is like 40%. France is like somewhere around 40 to 50%. Like, a lot of these countries across Europe are dependent on this. So once they do that, it's almost kind of strangling themselves. And then nobody factors in, they still have the markets, and Russia still has markets into the Asian front, into China. They have deals with North Korea, even though North Korea doesn't have very much. They still have that. They still have some of the outposts which they have in Africa, in the global south. When you start talking about like Venezuela and some of those other countries, you start thinking about UAE. They have partnerships there. Syria, Libya. They have partnerships all around the world, with, I would say, probably close to 2/3 of the rest of the world outside of of the Western Front. And so I think that that's often missed by a lot of people. I was wondering, like, more on the what do you think is going to happen as far as have you heard about the whole Chernobyl stuff? Because I keep hearing a lot of talks, and they're worried about what's going on with the seizing of Chernobyl.
So in according to the Russian Defense Ministry, it's Ukrainians that have been bombing the Chernobyl area. So you see that being said if you watch Russian media versus what's being said, oh, the Russians are trying to bomb it. Why would the Russians try to, like, bomb an area that would, it doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't make any sense. It just logistically,
it would have an effect. It would affect them just the same.
right.
Right. That's why it's
So,
retarded. No, you
yeah.
can't say that. It's stupid.
But just going off of what you said about, Russia having other markets, that's 100% true. And if you look at, like, the desperation of the United States, you really get more of a sense of what's really happening here. They went to Iran and to Venezuela to play nice and diplomatic, to ask, for oil, to ask for a good exchange, to ask them to be on their side. But the Venezuelan diplomats and large powerful people in the Venezuelan government have consistently said that the United States and NATO are the culprits here, and that they stand by Russia. And a lot of people underestimate how much support Russia has in the global south, not just from these, more socialist leaning nations like Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, but also from, like, in general, like India, even. That market isn't going to go away for them at all.
Yeah, I forgot to mention India. Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah.
Isn't it, speaking of Venezuela, I thought it was kind of interesting. They told us Guaido was president, but you asked for a meeting with Maduro for the oil.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of confused, because you told me for years that Guaido was.
You haven't heard, Chris? They're now officially recognizing Maduro as president now.
Yeah. And
I mean, late to the party. I just wonder all of the other countries who quickly came out and recognized Guaido, if they're too going to follow the United States again and, go back to recognizing Maduro. All of it is stupid. I mean, that's a great example to look at the situation with Maduro and Guaido, to look at the media, look at the situation and look at the media, look what they told you. Now something happens, and now we can see what the reality actually is. Obviously not to anyone in the chat or in this or on this show right now. We clearly know that. The problem is getting that information, getting that thought process out to maybe some of our family members and friends. Like, guys, just, open your goddamn eyes and ears. Maybe you should listen to us sometimes, right?
it's
We're not just
difficult.
crazy.
I have to say it's difficult. I argue with my dad all the time about this, because he spews propaganda to me, and it's interesting. I think a lot of part of it is the entire the cognitive dissonance of it all, because things are very, very bleak here in the United States, and then they're going to get really bad. It's going to get really bad. You know, gas prices in LA right now are about $7, between $6 and $7. They're going up every single day. And that's not just from Russia. That's something that was coming a long time ago. You know, that's definitely not, you know, this is something that they're using to blame Russia, to get people to blame Russia. But I think ultimately what's going to happen is Americans don't realize things until it hurts their pockets, right? Until they're directly affected. And other countries that have been affected by Western imperialism, they have no option but to recognize what's happening because they live it every single day. But now this is going to hit their pockets, and I think that is something where I think some people are going to start realizing, wait a minute now, because it's taking how much to fill up my gas tank. And also truckers that have been already protesting against the mandates are now saying we're not going to be able to deliver these goods and services to people because we can't afford to fill up our gas tank. It costs one trucker, I think, in a video that I saw, $1,000 to fill up a gas tank. And in places where, like in the south of this country, where Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Florida, where the minimum wage is still like $7.50 or something ridiculous.
Don't
like
forget
that.
Midwest.
Yeah, in the Midwest, where people don't also, the minimum wage is low, they're not making all this money, and now somehow gas is like half of your hourly wage. And then you have, of course, all the media or the elitist liberals, right? Oh, you're only a Trump supporter if you can't afford to pay gas. Or I saw somebody on Facebook share a meme today that's like, if you spend $5 on a beer, don't complain about gas prices. It's like, you don't have to buy like, you know, 20 gallons worth, like, you know, 20 beers. Like you don't do this every day to get to work. And the poorest people are the ones that live often further from their jobs. Example, Disney workers, people that have to drive long distances to actually go to work. And so I think maybe it is my hope that will wake up some Americans.
I want you to expound that, because I live out here also, and a lot of people don't realize Disney is in Orange County. A lot of these people who work there work in LA County. And so some of them are having commutes and drives before this easily like 45 minutes to an hour. Just a regular drive. And so if you're barely making, you know, over the state's minimum wage here, and then your gas prices are getting hiked through the roof, and you're having to make that long commute every day, it's eating you up. The same with like Knott's Berry Farm also.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, years ago when Bernie Sanders was running the second time, he went to actually do something good at that time, which was expose how little Disney workers were getting paid. And he went to the Anaheim Center, and he had all these Disney people there. And if you hear their stories, you know, so many of them lived in their cars. So many of them were homeless. And that's, I mean, I think that Disney did like actually give a higher wage, but in California,
after the Disney daughter, was it granddaughter or whatever, after she came out and bitched about it on TV, and then they decided to do it.
But everything's gone up since then. Everything, the cost of milk, the cost of bread, and if you look at wheat, and if you look at how that's going to be affected, it's going to get really, really bad. And I don't think people realize how bad it's going to get. And you know, we're not really prepared for it here. And also there was just the quote unquote pandemic that happened. And so people were already suffering. And I know California just cut off paying people's rent. I think this was the last month that they were going to do it. So you have people that haven't caught up because it's like impossible to catch up, and they're in a lot of trouble. And we've already seen that townhouse crisis here in both Orange County, but a lot in LA County, that's out of control. That there's, you know, so much poverty that I haven't seen this much. And by the way, the gas prices have surpassed the 2008 prices. So
Germality put what, $8 here. Remember in the 90s when they were $8. I've already seen, you know, places like Hollywood have already overpassed that, and it's going to keep going up. And it's a great point you bring up about how the gas prices are eventually going to start affecting the inflation more and more. When we're talking about inflation, we're not talking about the government overall inflation. We're talking about in your pocketbook, you know, real-time inflation. When you walk into a store and try to buy milk and food and all those different things, we're going to start seeing it in those areas also. We're going to start seeing it not only at the gas pump. We're going to start seeing it across the board. And I really think that's when maybe more Americans will start realizing that maybe this isn't such a smart idea. But at that point, I think it's going to be one of those, we've kind of dug ourselves, well, not we, but the nation has dug itself kind of into a hole. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, no, I was going to say, Variant was showing me a clip earlier of Colbert, right? And he's like, oh, I don't mind paying extra dollars at the pump if it helps stick it to Russia, more or less. I'm paraphrasing. And I drive a Tesla. So,
well, and George Takei said it also.
The people who can't afford Teslas and who cannot afford the increase in all these prices for all these items that we do need, they're watching people like Colbert and saying, yeah, you know what, I don't mind. It really is The Walking Dead, man. And there's no other way to put it.
We got to remember, what is the viewing audience for CNN age demographic and MSNBC? We're dealing with mostly our parents or people our parents' age who already have their houses, already most of the time have their cars, have been working in the job 20, 30 years and have higher incomes, and they can afford that. And they don't think about what it's like to be somebody who maybe you're 18 just starting out, or 19, like Jalen, my co-host on another show, or in your 20s or in your 30s or in your 40s, and you haven't started making those increases that they made at that time because the jobs are not paying these higher wages. You know, I mean, I don't think a lot of that's factored in.
Well, Marcus, even to the extent that, you make a decent salary, whatever raise you may get with the inflation, the rise in the cost of all this stuff, it negates your raise almost. So in some cases, it's like you may even be making less when you really, crunch the numbers. So something has to be done.
You are. I mean, I've already, they have the inflation calculators where you can literally just put it in a year and be able to see, like, if it was keeping up with inflation, the average, just average person would be making somewhere around $40 an hour, which the average person makes somewhere around like $12 an hour, something like that. So it shows you it's not keeping up.
Yeah, there are people that are going back to jobs they did a long time ago, and they were making more money a long time ago than they would be making now. And that's just one aspect of it. I mean, this whole thing is a lot more really like just evil than what it seems. If you look at what the liberals are talking about, and when I say that, I mean the shit libs and everything from the progressives to they're using this opportunity to push things like the Green New Deal, which we know is a plan for it, part of the whole Great Reset, right? And this is and that is the whole idea. It's like, well, guys, it's time to invest in fossil fuel alternatives. Well, obviously, it's been a long time to do that. Like this has been a need for a long time now, but you have to be careful with how much that even investing in those alternatives is going to cost, also energy wise, and who are you going to exploit to also do that? And you can't just do that without having like a plan as to like how you're going to transition, and they know this. So a lot of it is just virtue signaling, but also it's to weaponize this whole idea too, I think, of, well, maybe people shouldn't be driving. Maybe people should stay at home and work from home. Gee, that happens to be beneficial right now. If you're staying at home and you don't have to drive, guess who benefits? Oh, you do. But is that really something that a lot of people want to be doing? And this is been primed. Yes, because the vast majority of people that can do that are people that work in, the banking industry, the laptop class, so to speak. And like, of course, like there's not, I mean, sure, I'm not trying to shit on those people, obviously, but at the same time, it only benefits a certain group of people. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't fall within those parameters. And so somebody's got to get exploited. And I think they're going to weaponize this whole, well, we need to shift to other things because oil is expensive, to push these political agendas, but they're very privileged agendas because people still need to drive and people can't afford Teslas and electric cars. The most people that I know who have those. I mean, you know, you can get a hybrid made for a good price, but you still have to get gas with a hybrid. But most people that I know that can afford electric cars make a lot of money or are okay. And so when you say things like that without taking into account how poor people just can't afford that, and it's just very elitist, and it's just political points to try to pass, you know, more of this legislation that's going to make people dependent on whatever the government is offering at that time. And it's not something that is this whole, you know, idealistic view of, oh, this is what we wanted. We wanted the government to give us all things. No, they're not going to give it to you unless they put of, oh, you must agree to this XYZ. You must agree to letting us come into your life and censoring anything that dispels our narrative. You know, if you want healthcare, perhaps they're going to be like, you must abide by our healthcare rules. So it's no
I
longer
think that's
about-
what's coming. Oh yeah, I think
yeah,
that's definitely coming.
Marcus,
Yeah.
you've heard me say many a time on this show. That's why that Medicare for all the people screaming at, they don't even know what they're asking for. Like, you better be careful.
And that's why I
'Cause you
say
might
be
actually
careful.
you might get what you want, and you probably won't like it. So, you know, I tell everybody they got to chill. But, you know, going back to, you know, talking
Well,
about...
that's the issue. I just want to say this real quick, and I'll give it back to you, Chris. That's the thing. Medicare for all overall is a good idea, but you got to be careful who's instituting this.
Right.
And what they want back in return. But go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say, in addition to, you know, gas and groceries, people's rents are increasing ridiculous amounts. I mean, you know, hundreds of dollars, you know, for renewals. To move, you have to pay what first? If you're renting, right? You have to pay first, last, maybe security in some cases, depending on where you are. So you're going to have to come up with thousands of dollars to have to leave a place where you are that you maybe can no longer afford, to downgrade, to pay, you know, just a little bit less than where you are. And it's just eating everything up. So along with the push for going back to Fiorella's comment about the Green New Deal, right? This is also going to bring on UBI, right? They're going to have people begging the government. So it seems like every single thing they do, they have the solution right there. They just need to make you struggle a little bit. So then you actually beg them for what they want to give you anyway. It's a nasty game. I just need more of us to, I would say wake up, but they already are woke and they need to go back to sleep.
Well, it's
They're
a
woke,
long
not
kind of
awake.
woke. Yeah, exactly. That it's been weaponized for this, you know, culture war, virtue signaling. But the other aspect of it is crypto too, and what Biden's about to sign, where, you know, they're going to have full control of eventually every single crypto thing. And, you know, a lot of people said, no, that's never going to happen. No, it's happening. And I think, you know, a lot of people who are working people, including, including ourselves via the Rockfin platform, we get paid via crypto, and we have been surviving because YouTube demonetized us, obviously. So on some of that, you know, and like we're obviously funded by the people, and so like when they take that avenue, who's it going to hurt the most? It's not going to hurt the big whales who have a lot of money and are able to move it around. It's not going to hurt the people who have financial advisors and can like figure out what's going on. It's going to hurt any sort of working class person that has used these currencies to try to like save some money and go around what's happening with the fiat currency, because that's going to go down too. And so what we're going to see is also, you know, we've seen it already, is countries, people in sanctioned countries who have been using crypto to go around sanctions, they're also under attack. And I know people in Venezuela have done this much. And you know, and who knows what like how that's going to go around now. And it's very scary times, because it's hard to say where people should really invest. But I would say, you know, on, like I've said it before, on people learning to grow their own food, or at least stocking up, obviously within reason. Don't rob everybody off of everything, but like it's just hard to put all of your eggs in one basket. You don't want to do that, because there's so much uncertainty with what's happening.
Well, yeah, that's something that that I'm glad you brought up. You know, it's been what, about 10 months that you guys have been demonetized.
Yeah.
And that made me think about Well, that's just another form of censorship, what they're doing, because they're trying to do it, okay, a soft way of forcing you guys to play nice. And so that's kind of what that alludes on to the panel which you had last night, because especially I know Rachel Blevins, for instance, and then I know which I'll have I'm trying to remember Tara Reid on next week, where she's going through that also. And then I just noticed I was literally watching what's his name, Lee Camp, a video that he had with Scott Ritter, and Scott Ritter was calling out a lot of things earlier. And that video, I watched it like 2 days ago, tried to go back to it, watch it again. It says this video is not allowed in your country.
Right.
So I'm like, whoa. I mean, now it's gotten to the point where even the US is completely censoring anybody from RT. And if people say, oh, well, it doesn't matter, it's RT. They just, and I know some people don't like Rising or The Hill, but they did that to them also. They got, a week ban. And so if they're doing it to those outlets, and I like people think that's the reason why I know you guys were on this same point also about the whole banning Trump from Twitter. If they start banning Trump from Twitter, then how long is it before they come back and start banning all of us? Because Chris said this last week, how they start off with the Alex Joneses and people like that. And then it always works its way back around to us and normally hits us worse in the long run than it does the other side.
I would go further. I would say the Alex Joneses are there to sort of introduce this idea, because if you look at what Alex Jones said, he said a lot of truths within a lot of lies, and that is just the same thing as QAnon. It's like the purpose of that is to make any sort of criticism of the government some sort of right-wing conspiracy theory, and that is intelligence very much at work to discount any sort of counter narrative by tying certain pieces of that counter narrative with figures like Alex Jones and like QAnon and so on. And so what started then was, okay, well, since we don't like the guy and he's not somebody that people like, it's so easy. Let's censor him. And then on Trump, we don't like the guy. Let's censor him. It doesn't matter if he's the president of the United States. And then it became, oh, let's censor all the right wingers because they're a bunch of lunatics and Trump supporters and Nazis and all this stuff, and so on, to where, we were saying this for a long time. And I think, a lot of people didn't think it could happen to them. And I look at people like Brian Grimm and I'm like, hello, like you like this has been happening to a lot of us for a long time. Welcome to our world. Now you have to deal with what we've been saying and screaming about for years. And I mean, I'm not cheering for the censorship, but it's almost like when somebody that has been, sort of like not as like, pro censorship necessarily, but under like, kind of under the radar, like not okay with it, because they especially with the January 6th stuff, when Pasta and I were covering elections, so many of these people were like, status quo or status coup, we're calling for the election for us to get taken down, and then they kept getting censored thereafter. So it doesn't matter if you play ball. And even a lot of people who have been in independent media who have kind of fenced that, right, and not covered COVID the way it should have been covered, not covered the Great Reset the way it should have been covered, not challenged those narratives and the globalist agenda to avoid being called right wingers, to avoid being called these sort of, ooh, like this is just a fringe left or whatever. Like it's like, okay, well, I lose respect a little bit, or a lot, because then you're fence sitting, and I don't like fence sitters, because you have to take not necessarily a side, but a stance, knowing and understanding the information. And if you're just going to play it safe, then that tells me that you do have, you're easier to convince. And so what I've been seeing in independent media is like a lot of people who were very wrong on the COVID narrative, who didn't speak out, not really understanding like how that's so intrinsically tied to what's happening right now with Ukraine and Russia. It is the same type of propaganda, the same type of slogans. The only difference is now it's about Russians instead of anti-vaxxers. You talk about misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. That's all in the Department of Homeland Security's little bulletin they released not long ago. It's
part of the playbook.
The same
I
thing.
mean, it's the same thing like where you guys covered the trucker strike. It's the
Exactly.
same thing. You know, one side is put on the other, and the crazy part about it is it was mostly the so-called left who were the biggest split.
Yeah.
And I feel like honestly, now that you mention of it, I honestly think it's almost a ploy to really hit back at the Democrats' left flank to shut them off. Because if you go back to what the Clintons called it, counter scheduling, where they would always punch to their left flank. And so it almost seems like this censorship is about shutting down that aspect, because they know we can get most of the Republicans on our side eventually. And those ones who don't, everybody thinks they're crazy and racist anyway. So let's just ignore them.
And this is an election year too, right? So we have the midterms that later on this year. So you can bet everything you got that it's going to get worse as we get closer to the election. I mean,
Well,
you know,
that's remember earlier I said this probably maybe 6 or 7 months ago. As soon as the new year happens, no matter what's going on with COVID, all the mandates are going to start dropping, because they've been getting beat up in the polls on this, even though they keep lying about the polls. Because you look at these margin of errors, now they went to 6 to 7 point margin of errors, because they're skewing the polls. They know how bad this stuff is. They just can't release how unpopular some of the things they're doing. And so they got to start trying to reel things back to try to get back some of those voters who are upset with them for some of these mandates and different measures that they've been pushing. I was wondering, back to the Victoria Nuland situation. What do you think is going to happen with that? Do you think that we are going to have some kind of possible, or I guess I'll rephrase it. What's the possibility that we have some kind of, as what Ned Price said, false flag attack that happens, these biolabs?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, it's going to be obviously blamed on Russia, and we know who the false flag doers are going to be. They've told us. The thing is, these people tell us everything that they're going to do. You just have to listen for it. And I do think it's extremely possible, especially if you look at was discovered in those documents, according to the Russian ministry, which it was like viruses on bats and anthrax and all sorts of plagues and birds, like different types of avian flu and all of the stuff that was discovered. And I'm still looking into it even more, and I want to have this person on who did a lot of research on it. She's from the region, but it's kind of crazy because you cannot separate what exactly, for this reason, which what's going on in Russia and Ukraine, and what's happening, what happened with the pandemic. And I think there's definitely more to this than the State Department wants us to know, because immediately Jen Psaki got on Twitter denying everything. Well, Victoria Nuland basically admitted it, but shifted the conversation to, but this is about Russia having access, and we need to be careful with what Russia may release and all that. That was the only pivot they could do, because that's what they have to get the public to focus on. Oh, Russia's gonna have some sort of bio weapon attack. But the thing is, we've seen this before. We've been here before. It's not exactly the same, but it rhymes, right? And so now we're in this situation where a lot of us are recognizing it. But we have to be careful with the intelligence community going after younger people who weren't around for 9/11, who weren't around for the war in Iraq. I mean, my sister
they're just bringing them
around that age, and they don't know anything, because they were born after the fact. They were so young.
Correct, but they're bringing them into the fold. I mean, I think you guys saw it yesterday, maybe on Twitter. What the White House is bringing the top TikTok users to brief them on the situation with Russia and Ukraine. I mean, just think about. I mean, I don't have TikTok. I have a kid who does, right? I can't think of any top TikTok user who's not geared towards some stupid shit, right?
Right.
Cooking, dancing, trying on clothes, makeup, what have you. So these are the people who they're going to get to basically pass the propaganda on to the generation under us, maybe 2 generations under us. So they're gonna come up all crazy too. So you constantly, I mean, I hate to use his word, but it really is an info war out here, and you know, you
Yeah.
really have to be prepared to fight it on every single level. Doesn't matter, even if you're not into politics, you're not into news, you're only into sports. Well, they used the Brittany Griner situation to paint Russia as a bad guy with that situation. I still don't know
Yep.
what's going on with that, but Marcus, I tell you,
Oh, we'll get into it a little bit later.
I still feel real funny about that situation. I mean, she was leaving, from what I understood, she was leaving New York. You're allowed to have your bud there. It's cool, and she got caught there. But there's something about that that's real funny to me, because it's like, at this point in time, why would you even keep weed in your bag and you're going to Russia? So I don't know. We'll see as that plays out. But again, at the end of the day, it still helps the narrative along, right? Russia bad.
Mhm.
Look, they're taking
Yeah.
one of our athletes and entertainers, and they're black, and she's gay. I mean, so
Yeah.
they're just
Yeah,
hitting all the
we'll get
demographics
into
for
it.
her.
I'll give you some of my thoughts on it. I wanted to tell you, Fee, I really like that interview you had with Alex Rubenstein. Also, it was very very enlightening, because a lot of people just assume that every Jewish person is on board with Zelensky and everything that's going on with Ukraine. And so I just wanted to make sure to mention that. I was
Alex is
wondering.
I just want to
Uh-huh.
add, Alex's family is from the region too, and I didn't
Mm.
even know that until he divulged the information like a few generations back. But that's also why it was such a big deal to him as well.
Yeah, I have one thing that's been kind of floating in the back of my mind, and since I haven't saw you guys start talking about this yet, which I know you will, but I was wondering, what are your thoughts as far as China, Ukraine, not Ukraine, but China, India, and Russia are really close together, and I've even seen Turkey making a lot of movements also. I'm wondering. Are we about to see the same thing kind of play out again, what we're seeing right now with Russia and Ukraine, with China and Taiwan?
I don't know. I mean, I thought that it's interesting with China and Taiwan because are you talking in terms of like the China and Taiwan coming at each other, right? That's what you're talking
Well,
about?
yeah, I'm talking about the possibility of China invading Taiwan.
Well, the thing I have a hard time thinking that China would invade Taiwan, but the thing is, a large segment of the global South recognizes China over Taiwan.
Mhm.
And I was just in Nicaragua where they're still going to keep having diplomacy with, Taiwan, but they shifted from Taiwan to China. And there are many arguments for or against that, right? There are many arguments as to what is legitimate and what isn't. But I mean, according to a lot of people, Taiwan, is weaponized once again by the West to try to sow division and to try to gain control of the region. It's the same thing. So it's just kind of difficult to say if that's going to continue happening. I mean, I think the US is going to weaponize whatever they can, but I don't think they're going to mess with China as much. And the reason I think they're not is because you can see their cries right now for relevancy, in terms of having this unilateral power. And you can see that the United States and the West are losing that unilateral power. You can see that the empire is in decay right now because they are no longer the
The
one sole
hegemony.
powerful nation. Yeah, I mean, it's still a hegemony, but it's not necessarily they're not as powerful as they were before, in spite of the 900 military bases and all of the
Mhm.
stuff. And the reason is because we're an import nation, right?
Yep.
We import everything. We don't have self-sufficiency. Well, what's happened is that a lot of the countries that they've been sanctioning have developed a sort of self-sufficiency.
Mhm.
Russia has been preparing itself for a long time for these sanctions, as Nicaragua did. As I've done, interviewed several people there talking about how they have this agricultural focus on growing their own food, on being self-sufficient, where 90% of the food that is in the country comes from the country itself. They really have very little imports going on, but they're largely self-sufficient. Same with Cuba, that
Mhm.
in terms of the medical industry there, they had to pretty much do what they could to survive. And so those sanctions and cause these nations to develop a sort of self-sufficiency. And so we don't have that at all. We also have people that are highly unaware of how that works in this country. And so what I think is happening is, and I've said this before, I think we're shifting to a multipolar world. Now, is it really going to be a multipolar world? Is that multipolar world actually going to fight against the global agenda? Or is that multipolar world just another distraction that's actually eventually going to be still a part of that global agenda? That is like, the further question if you're thinking about it in terms of that.
Oh yeah.
But there's definitely a shift in terms of the power structure, right? From the United States to obviously now China is a major player in this. And that's something that's why you're seeing like the xenophobia with Russia and China. Now you're seeing it because now they're saying, oh, well, China is now weaponizing the biolabs in Ukraine because it helps their narrative that they had nothing to do with COVID. So you're seeing that especially geared toward the right, because the right, a lot of them see China as like, the worst thing in the world. And obviously there's fair criticisms to China, but like, that's weaponized as well as it is for the left in Russia, which obviously took a huge start with Russia via Russiagate and all of that. So all of that's coming to fruition. And I think they're going to weaponize both to try to stow some sort of last attempt to remain at high control of these regions. But I don't think it's going to work, to be honest.
Yeah, that's the reason why I brought that up, because that's kind of what I see overall looks like happening is that the US, the blood is kind of in the water, that they're a little weak, and nations which have been rising have been deciding that they are going to, start testing and seeing how weak is America right now. And if you think about it, what Venezuela, you see that coup attempt already didn't fail, where normally throughout the global south they were able to put through those agendas, especially going back to Iran Contra and going into all of those different things that they were able to do, some of the influence that they've been able to do into North Africa in the past. Now we're starting to see more and more and more the stuff which the CIA has been putting into play is falling apart. We look at Bolivia. They put their little puppet leader in there, then boom, that's already fell apart. And some of the same things which they've been doing in North Africa with a lot of these different leaders that they've been putting into power, more and more and more, it looks like the US is kind of losing influence everywhere. And so that's why I'm wondering that, China and Russia being the, I guess we'll say number 2 and number 3 superpowers in the world are saying, hey, now's the time that they're weaker. They've been kind of testing their might, pushing across, into our territory. Now they're not as strong and we don't have to take this anymore. So we're going to kind of push back a little.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that assessment. And, that starts with the fact that we're so reliant on everybody else. And that's why we have, why we can get things cheaper here, because we depend on all these imports. And for example, if you like even something as simple as like clothes, in Latin America and in Peru and in certain countries like even Nicaragua or Honduras, some clothing costs more there than it costs here, because here we can get it from sweatshops, from Southeast Asia, and it costs us very little to do that. So I think Americans are going to see their way of life suddenly change. And of course, this comparison always happens, but I think it's definitely accurate. I mean, at least in the general sense, this is Rome falling apart, and unfortunately, we have to as Americans prep for that because it's largely these rich men go to fight wars and they put poor people to fight them, but they never get any sort of we never see any justice come from it. We continue seeing these same players and warmongers. Victoria Nuland should have nothing to do with government right now, yet she's the Deputy Secretary of State right now. So it's the same players. I mean, what's his name, William Burns, who was involved for a long time, is now the CIA director, and even he knew about Russia's red lines. So it's the same people in power, the same, it doesn't matter. And you guys mentioned the elections. Well, the elections are going to be weaponized too to sort of create this whole dynamic of, I think the country needs to unite, blah blah blah, but it's not going to be a real sort of unity, because if we haven't noticed, a lot of the Republicans, the neocons, have been playing ball with this anti-Russia rhetoric, just as the liberals
And
have. So
they,
there's that
look,
unity.
I'm glad you mentioned the neocons. They were brought in the fold a long time ago because most of them really didn't like Donald Trump personally, but they were all on his dick when he decided to push a button and drop a bomb in Afghanistan, escalate matters in Syria. He paid no attention to what they were doing in Africa, et cetera, et cetera. So they've been part of the fold and infecting shit libs' minds for like the last couple years. I mean, just look at the whole Lincoln Project, right? That's all neocons, and all I saw, like at least online, the people most supporting them were friggin' Democratic voters. So it didn't even make any sense. So, like you said, this election, they're going to they're going to take everything they did with COVID and now what they're doing with Russia, and again, they're going to put it on steroids. If you aren't like pro-America, Russia, then you need to be kicked off the internet. Period. So it's going to be very interesting going forward. We're going to see a lot of change coming. People are going to shift, but I just hope they stay the hell away from me, man. I can't deal with these people.
It's hard. Yeah.
Well, I said I didn't want to keep you too long. I know you got stuff going on, and I know you're a busy woman, and I appreciate the time which you were able to spend with us. And I definitely do want to have you back, hopefully sometime soon, to talk issues about the global South, because I do not feel they get talked about enough. And me and Chris, we're definitely passionate about a lot of the issues which go on in South America and Caribbean also. And so we definitely want to talk about that. I'll probably get a panel, hopefully get you on here. Maybe was it Blue Moon Red Wine, a couple of our other friends out there, Atris, and talk about some of these things. I was wondering, would you like to plug anything that you have coming up? Any shows, any guests that we should keep our eyes out for?
I have to share an article that I just did, where
Sure.
I compared the elections in Nicaragua to Costa Rica, because Costa Rica is a huge partner of the United States. They're pretty much, one of my friends called it the poorest nation in Europe, because so many, it's where there's a lot of like US sort of privatization going on, and it's obviously always propped up in comparison to Nicaragua. And there's an election coming up where none of the candidates are great at all whatsoever. But there's obviously one worse than the other. And so I was just comparing those elections in terms of also in terms of the history and how so different it is. So I'll be sharing that on my Twitter, but also we're just going to continue covering everything that's going on in Russia and Ukraine. We've had a lot of people on to talk about it, and we're just going to continue staying on top of it, as well as the biolab situation, because that is extremely interesting layer of everything that's happening as well. And also obviously the global agenda perspective as to how that plays into what's going on and what the next thing that is going to be the new thing people hate is going to be once this whole thing happens, and how like the mandate situation is going to be still weaponized, I think, because now everything has been laid out and set. And so now it's going to be easier to get people to comply to certain things. So we'll really see what's going on. And thank you guys for having me. I really want to say about censorship is really at an all-time high. So make sure you diversify your content, and not put it all in on YouTube, put it in different avenues. There are even places like Rumble that have been censoring people too. Telegram censored RT's channel. These places that are supposed to be like free and open. DuckDuckGo has been doing the same.
Oh,
so
we're going to talk about that too.
yeah. So do that. Don't just put all of your eggs in one basket, whether it's finances or whether it's your content. So yeah, and also continue speaking out against censorship. There's a reason why we have people like Julian Assange that have been jailed and continue to be jailed, and this is why. And just pay attention to the people that are getting censored, why they're getting censored, and understand that there's a reason for that. So thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it.
You're very, very welcome. So glad to have you here.
Thanks, Fiorella.
hopefully this will be this will lead to more and more you know opportunity, I guess, more and more of seeing you on here, and
Of course.
more, I guess, what do we call it, collaboration.
Collaboration.
Yes, so definitely want to see more of that. I mean, thank you so much for being on again. We're definitely going to keep talking about that, about those issues. And I guess since you mentioned not putting our eggs all in one basket, I'm just trying to work it out myself, because I'm the person who deals with a lot of a lot of the stuff. So I'm not the most tech savvy person there is, but we will be going on to what is that, Odyssey.
Yeah, good
We'll be
choice.
figuring out. So, on Odyssey, we might even do kind of what you guys do, how you'll have some of it for YouTube, and then some of it has to be, strictly like Rockfin content. We're going to start doing some of that so that we can get deeper into some of these issues, which we get in trouble for a lot because we have gotten quite a bit of strikes over
really?
time. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, the channel was almost gone not that long ago.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a whole nother subject which we will not hash into. But
Yeah, we've had videos like, we'll do one, now, normally we would come on later. Then in the morning I get up, I'm on the East Coast. I wake up 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. I go back to look at the show. That shit gone.
Wow.
This happened to us a couple times. Yeah. And I mean, we're just a small little channel, nothing like compared to you guys or even like Slow News Day or anything like that. So if it's happening to us, clearly, if they don't shadow ban you, they don't ban you, they demonetize you. So they have like a million ways like just to keep
Chris,
sticking that needle in you.
don't forget, they've literally cut our views in half on videos.
Oh yeah, they've done that to us too. I know exactly what you're talking about. I'll look at it and then it'll go backwards. I'm like, that's impossible. Or they'll unsubscribe.
We start screenshotting it.
Yeah, it's crazy. People think we're making it up. I'm like, no, it's real. And other people have said, oh, they unsubscribed me from you, and all the things. It happens. It happens, and that's why I say put your content somewhere else, and eventually maybe you'll get onto Rockfin. But there's there's a lot of that happening right now, unfortunately. So keep going. Thank you for doing what you do. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you. Yeah, we're big fans of you over here. So I mean, definitely support Convo Couch, and well, we love everybody over at the MCSC network. So shout out to everybody over there, Franco, Misty, all of you guys over there, Nico. Much love to everybody over there.
All right, guys. Much love. See you later.
All right, see you later.